Josh raised his glass, his grin wide as he waved a letter in the air. Well, everyone, I have got some great news. Grandpa left me his vacation home in the will. The room fell silent for a moment before breaking into murmurs. Some guests clapped, others exchanged surprised glances. My hands clenched at my sides, but I forced myself to smile. Congrats, Josh, I said, keeping my voice steady. His smirk deepened. I mean, it makes sense, right? Grandpa wanted me to have it. I was always his favorite. A few people chuckled. My mother shifted uncomfortably, her fingers gripping the stem of her wine glass. I glanced at her, but she quickly looked away. I swallowed the lump in my throat. This was not right. Grandpa would have never done this, not without telling me. Josh patted my shoulder, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. I know you probably thought he would split things equally, but hey, life is not always fair. I nodded, my smile never faltering. You are right, Josh. Life is not always fair. Then, without another word, I turned and walked out the door. An hour later, I returned, with something that silenced the entire room. Grandpa's vacation home was my favorite place in the world. It was not just a house. It was where I spent my childhood summers, where I learned to fish, where I sat on the porch listening to Grandpa's stories. It was peace, safety, and home. I never thought about ownership. It never mattered to me. Until now. Josh and I grew up in the same house, but in two different worlds. He was the charming one, the one everyone liked. I was the responsible one, the one expected to clean up his messes. He got away with everything. I never did. When we were kids, he would take my toys and break them, then blame me when our mother found the pieces. As we got older, it was money, favors, and stolen credit. He lied, cheated, and manipulated. But somehow, he always came out looking good. I should have known this time would be no different. When Grandpa got sick, I was the one who stayed. I was there for the doctor's visits. I picked up his medications. I sat beside him when the pain was too much. Josh, he visited when it suited him, always with a big smile and a grand gesture. He has a busy life, my mother would say when I pointed it out. You cannot expect him to be around all the time. But I was busy too. I had a job. I had responsibilities. I still made time. Josh made excuses. Grandpa noticed. He never said anything bad about Josh, but I saw the disappointment in his eyes. You have a good heart, he told me one evening, gripping my hand weakly. That is why I trust you. Those words meant everything to me. The night Grandpa died, I sat on the porch of the vacation home, staring at the sky. The house felt hollow without his presence. My chest ached, knowing I would never hear his stories again. Josh was not there. He had promised to come that day, but never showed up. 2 days later, he walked into the funeral, wearing an expensive suit, shaking hands, acting like the grieving grandson. I just cannot believe he is gone, he said dramatically to one of the guests, shaking his head. I clenched my fists, biting my tongue. There was no point in calling him out. After the funeral, I expected the will to be read soon. Weeks passed, and nothing happened. Every time I asked my mother, she avoided my questions. It is complicated, she would say. Just be patient. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my gut. One evening, as I walked past the study, I heard Josh on the phone. His voice was low and urgent. No, listen, I need that letter to look perfect. It has to be airtight. I cannot afford any mistakes. I froze. Letter? What letter? My pulse quickened as I listened. Yes, I know what the will said, but that house should be mine. Grandpa always liked me more. I deserve it. My stomach twisted. He had done something big. I stepped back, my hands shaking. I did not know how, but I knew one thing for sure. Josh had betrayed me, and he thought he would get away with it. Looking back, the signs had always been there. I should have seen it coming when Josh suddenly started asking about the vacation home months before Grandpa's passing. That place is amazing, he had said casually one evening. Must be worth a fortune. I shrugged. I guess. But Grandpa does not care about that. It is more than money to him. Josh smirked. Yeah, but if he ever leaves it to someone, that someone is going to be set for life. A month later, when Grandpa's condition worsened, Josh started showing up more often. At first, I was relieved. I thought maybe he finally understood the importance of family. Maybe he wanted to be there. But then, I noticed something strange. He was always alone with Grandpa. He would show up late at night, after I had left, or early in the morning, before I arrived. One evening, I walked in just as Josh was tucking something into his pocket. He looked up, startled, then quickly covered his expression with a grin. "Hey, man," he said smoothly. "Just checking in on Grandpa?" I nodded, but something felt off. Then, a week later, I caught him sneaking out of Grandpa's office. He had a folder in his hand, but when he saw me, he quickly hid it behind his back. "What are you doing?" I asked. He laughed. "Relax. I was just looking for some old family pictures." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But something about the way he avoided my eyes made my stomach twist. I should have pressed him. I should have demanded to see what was in that folder. But I did not, because I still wanted to trust my brother. Now, standing in the hallway, listening to him on the phone, I finally understood. Josh had planned this. He had forged something, maybe a letter, maybe even a fake will. He had stolen what Grandpa left for me, and he thought I would just accept it. I clenched my fists, my body shaking with anger. But I did not storm into the room. I did not confront him. I needed to be smart. Josh thought he had won, but he had no idea what was coming. Josh had always been the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong, who always managed to land on his feet no matter what he did. But as I sat in my car outside his housewarming party, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, I realized that this time, he had gone too far. He had stood in the middle of that crowded living room, drink in hand, smirking as he held up a legal document. "Grandpa wanted me to have the vacation home," he had announced, waving the paper like a trophy. "It is all here, signed and official." The room had erupted in cheers. Our mother had looked uncertain, shifting uncomfortably in her seat. But she had said nothing. I had forced a smile, congratulated him, and then quietly walked out. Because I knew, deep in my gut, that he was lying. Grandpa would never have changed the will. He had always been fair, always made it clear that the vacation home was meant for both of us. He had reassured me of that the last time I saw him, so how had Josh ended up with it alone? I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to start. I drove straight to Grandpa's lawyer. It was late, but I did not care. I knocked on the door until the porch light flicked on, and Mr. Lawson, a tired-looking man in his 60s, opened the door. He squinted at me. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" "I need to see Grandpa's will," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. His frown deepened. "Why?" "Because something is wrong." He sighed, but after a moment, he stepped aside. "Come in." I followed him to his study, where he unlocked a cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. "This is the official copy," he said, flipping through it. "Your grandfather was very clear about his wishes." I held my breath as he turned to the section about the vacation home. And then, there it was. The truth. To my grandsons, Josh, and... My stomach clenched. "It says both of us." Lawson nodded. "Of course it does. That was his final decision. He never changed it." I exhaled slowly, the pieces starting to fall into place. "But Josh has a letter, a signed document saying Grandpa left it to him alone." Lawson frowned. "That is impossible." "Unless it is fake," I said quietly. His expression darkened. "If that document exists, it is fraud." I gritted my teeth. Josh had done a lot of terrible things in his life, but this was a new level of low. He had stolen from me, from our family, and he had done it with that smug grin, believing I would never question it. I took a deep breath. "I need a certified copy of this will." Lawson printed it for me, and I left with it in hand. My mind was no longer clouded by anger. Now it was focused. Josh thought he had won. He had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I went to the courthouse. If Josh had filed the forged document anywhere, there would be a record. I requested to see any recent property transfers under Grandpa's name. And there it was. A document signed just 2 weeks before Grandpa's death, supposedly transferring full ownership to Josh. I clenched my jaw. Grandpa had been in the hospital then, weak, barely able to move. There was no way he had walked into an office and signed that paper himself. "Who notarized this?" I asked the clerk, keeping my voice calm. She checked. "A Mary Holden. Where does she work?" "Independent notary, works from home." I nodded, thanking her before heading to my car. My hands were steady, my mind focused. Josh had been sloppy. He thought I would let this go. He thought wrong. Mary Holden was a woman in her 50s, professional but nervous when I knocked on her door. The moment I mentioned my grandfather's will, she visibly paled. I do not know what you are talking about," she stammered. I pulled out my phone and pressed record. "Tell me the truth, Mary. Because if I walk out of here without an answer, my next stop is the police station." Her hands trembled. And then she cracked. "Josh, he paid me to sign it," she whispered. "He said it was a mistake, that your grandfather had meant to do it earlier, but never got the chance. He gave me $5,000. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I felt a cold, sharp satisfaction. Josh had not just forged the document. He had bribed someone to make it look real. That was fraud. And now, I had proof. By the time I arrived at Josh's house, he was completely unaware of what was coming. He opened the door with a smirk, still riding the high of his fake victory. "What do you want?" he asked. I smiled. "To congratulate you, of course. You got exactly what you wanted, right?" His smirk faltered just slightly. "Yeah, guess I did." I stepped inside, setting my phone on the counter. "One thing, though. I stopped by the courthouse this morning." Josh stiffened. "Why would you do that?" "Just to check something." I pulled out the certified will and slid it across the counter. "Turns out, Grandpa never changed a thing." His face went pale. That is not possible." "Oh, it is," I said, leaning closer. "Which means the letter you showed at the party. It is fake," Josh swallowed. You do not have proof of that." I pulled out my phone and pressed play. Mary's trembling voice filled the room. "Josh, he paid me to sign it. He said it was a mistake. He gave me $5,000. Silence. Josh's breathing turned shallow. You set me up." I chuckled. "No, Josh, you set yourself up. I just followed the trail of lies." His hands clenched into fists. "What do you want?" I picked up the will. "I want my house back, and I want you to pay for what you did." His lips parted, but no sound came out. For the first time in his life, Josh had no way out. And I had just begun. I walked out of Josh's house, feeling the cool night air hit my face. My heartbeat was steady, my mind sharp. I had everything I needed, the truth, the proof, and the leverage. But I was not going to act impulsively. That was Josh's way, not mine. If I wanted real justice, I needed to be smart. Methodical. Josh had spent years getting away with things because no one had ever held him accountable. He always had an excuse, always had someone covering for him. This time, there would be no escape. I slid into my car, gripping the steering wheel as I thought through my next move. I could not just confront him and expect him to back down. He was the kind of person who would double down, lie, manipulate, and twist the situation to his advantage. Number I needed to hit him where it hurt the most: his reputation, his money, and his freedom. The first thing I did was make copies of everything: the real will, the fraudulent document, and Mary Holden's confession. I backed it all up in multiple places: my laptop, a secure cloud drive, and even a USB hidden in my office. If Josh tried to destroy the evidence, it would not matter. Next, I reached out to a lawyer. Not Mr. Lawson. He was too closely tied to our grandfather and might tip Josh off. I needed someone aggressive, someone who would not hesitate to take legal action. That is how I found Daniel Carter. Daniel was young, sharp, and had a reputation for winning ugly cases. When I met him in his office the next morning, he listened carefully, his fingers tapping against his desk. "Let me get this straight," he said finally. "Your brother forged a legal document, bribed a notary, and used that to claim full ownership of the vacation home?" "Exactly," I said. Daniel exhaled. "This is serious. If you take this to court, he could be looking at fraud charges, maybe even jail time." "I know," I said. "That is why I want to do this right. No mistakes." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "You have a solid case. We can challenge the transfer, have it reversed, and expose him for what he did. But I need to ask, how far do you want to take this?" I did not hesitate. All the way. While Daniel worked on the legal side, I started on the financial attack. Josh had always been reckless with money. He spent more than he earned, relied on loans, and assumed things would always work out for him. That housewarming party he threw? It was not just a celebration. It was a statement, a way to show off. He wanted people to believe he was successful, that he had everything under control. But the truth was, he was drowning in debt. I had overheard him on the phone a few weeks ago, arguing with his bank about a loan payment. At the time, I had ignored it, thinking it was just another one of his bad financial decisions. Now it was my weapon. I called in a favor from an old friend who worked in finance. It took a little digging, but soon I had a full picture of Josh's financial situation, and it was worse than I expected. Maxed out credit cards, late mortgage payments, a car loan he was barely keeping up with. And the kicker? He had taken out a private loan using the vacation home as collateral. That meant if the ownership transfer was reversed, the bank could come after him for the full amount. I almost laughed. He had set himself up for disaster. But I was not done yet. Reputation mattered to Josh. He cared about what people thought of him. He built his image on being the successful, charming, self-made guy. So, I decided to take that apart, piece by piece. I started with the people at his housewarming party, the same ones who had cheered when he announced that the house was his. I made sure they knew the truth. I sent a few carefully worded messages. Nothing too direct, just enough to plant doubt. "Hey, did you hear about the vacation home? Turns out there is some legal trouble with it. Crazy, right? Not sure if you knew, but apparently there is some confusion about the will. It is not as simple as Josh made it seem." Gossip spreads fast, especially in social circles that thrive on drama. Within days, people were talking. Then, I moved to social media. I did not post anything outright accusing Josh. That would be too obvious. Instead, I shared an old photo of me and Grandpa at the vacation home with a simple caption. "Some things are worth fighting for." It was vague, but it got attention. People started asking questions. Comments rolled in. "What happened? Is this about Josh? Did he do something?" I ignored the messages. I let the curiosity build. Josh must have noticed, because 2 days later, he called me. "What the hell are you doing?" His voice was sharp, defensive. I smirked. "I have no idea what you are talking about." "Do not play dumb. People are asking me weird questions. I know you are behind this." I leaned back in my chair. "You mean people are starting to wonder if you lied? If you cheated your own family?" Josh exhaled angrily. "I do not know what you think you are doing, but you need to stop." I let the silence stretch. Then I said, "Or what?" He did not have an answer. I had taken control, and he knew it. The final piece of my plan was the legal strike. Daniel moved fast. Within a week, we had filed a lawsuit to challenge the fraudulent transfer. The moment Josh received the court notice, he knew he was in trouble. He tried to call me again. I let it go to voicemail. Then he texted, "We can work this out, right? No need to get lawyers involved." I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. You should have thought of that before you stole from me. No more games. Josh had spent his whole life taking from people, believing there would be no consequences. Now, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. Josh had always believed he was untouchable. He thought he could lie, cheat, and manipulate his way through life without ever facing the fallout. But this time, the walls were closing in, and I could tell he felt it. He stopped showing off on social media. His friends, the ones who had celebrated with him at the housewarming party, were starting to distance themselves. The lawsuit was in motion, and he knew that if the court ruled against him, his entire financial world would collapse. But instead of backing down, he tried one last desperate move. He showed up at my place. It was late, almost midnight, when I heard the knock at my door. I knew who it was before I even opened it. Josh stood there, looking more disheveled than I had ever seen him. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by something closer to panic. "Can we talk?" he asked. I crossed my arms. "Talk about what?" He let out a sharp breath. "Look, I messed up, all right? I should not have forged the will, but you do not have to do this. We are family." I almost laughed. "Family? You stole from me, Josh. You stood in front of a room full of people and acted like you had won some prize. Do not talk to me about family." He ran a hand through his hair. "I will give you half. We can split it. Just drop the lawsuit." I shook my head. "It does not work like that. The will was already clear. The house was supposed to be mine. You tried to change that. Now you are facing the consequences." His jaw tightened. "If this goes to court, I could lose everything." I met his gaze, letting the weight of my next words sink in. "That is not my problem." I shut the door in his face. The court date arrived faster than expected. Josh had tried every trick in the book to delay it, claiming he was sick, hiring a new lawyer at the last minute, even trying to file counterclaims against me. But none of it worked. The judge saw through his lies immediately. Daniel laid out everything: the forged documents, the bribed notary, and even Josh's financial mess. When Mary Holden was called to testify, she did not hold back. She admitted that Josh had pressured her into notarizing a fake will, thinking no one would question it. Josh's lawyer tried to spin it as a misunderstanding. The judge was not buying it. By the time the ruling came down, it was almost laughable how fast Josh's world fell apart. The house transfer was reversed immediately. The real will was reinstated, officially naming me as the rightful owner. And then came the financial blow. Since Josh had taken out a loan against the house, but it was never legally his, the bank came after him for the full amount. He had 30 days to pay, or they would seize his assets. And guess what? He did not have the money. I thought that would be the end of it, that once he lost the house, the debt, and the lawsuit, he would finally back down. But Josh did not know when to quit. A week later, I found out he had started telling people that I had set him up, that I had tricked him into signing the wrong documents, that I had manipulated the courts. He was trying to save face, trying to hold on to whatever scraps of his reputation he had left. So, I decided to finish this once and for all. I sent one last message to the group chat, the same one he had used to invite everyone to his housewarming party. Since there has been some confusion, I thought everyone should see the real story. Attached were the legal documents proving his fraud, the court ruling, and a clip of Mary Holden's testimony admitting that Josh had paid her off. I did not add anything else. I did not need to. The truth spoke for itself. Josh never recovered from that final blow. He lost the house. His bank accounts were drained trying to cover his debts. His friends, at least the ones who still believed in him, finally saw him for what he really was. Last I heard, he had left town, trying to start over somewhere new. But no matter where he went, he could not outrun the truth. As for me, I moved into the vacation home, just like Grandpa had always wanted. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace, because justice had been served. After the court ruling, I thought Josh would finally accept his fate, that he would cut his losses, disappear for a while, maybe even try to rebuild. But I should have known better. Josh had spent his entire life avoiding consequences. He was not going to stop now. At first, he tried to manipulate the narrative. He told anyone who would listen that I had set him up, that the will was confusing, that I had tricked Grandpa into giving me the house. He tried painting himself as the victim, but people were not buying it anymore. His closest friends, the same ones who had celebrated with him at the housewarming party, slowly distanced themselves. No one wanted to be associated with a fraud. The legal documents were public record, and anyone who looked into them could see the truth. Then he tried a different tactic. He went to our mother. "Josh is struggling," she told me over the phone. "Do you really need to do this to him?" I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Do this to him? Mom, he stole from me." She sighed. "He is your brother. He made a mistake. But you have the house now, so why keep fighting?" "Because he tried to ruin me," I said flatly. "Because he has never once apologized. And because if I let him get away with this, he will do it again." She was quiet for a moment. "You know how he is," she said finally. "He does not think things through." "Exactly," I said. "And maybe it is time he learns." She did not argue after that. Josh's life spiraled quickly. The bank came after him first, demanding payment for the loan he had taken against the house. Since the house was never legally his, the responsibility fell squarely on his shoulders. Then, the IRS flagged him for tax fraud. Apparently, he had been misreporting income for years. With no steady job and no assets left, he had no way to pay. And that was when I learned the real nightmare he was in. It turned out that Josh had not just taken out loans from the bank. He had also borrowed money from the wrong kind of people. People who do not send polite reminders. Daniel, my lawyer, called me one afternoon with an update. "You might want to sit down for this," he said. I leaned back in my chair. "What now?" "Josh took out a private loan 6 months ago, a big one, and not from a bank." A bad feeling settled in my stomach. "Who from?" "A guy named Vincent Holloway," Daniel said. I stiffened. I knew that name. Vincent was not just a loan shark. He was the kind of guy who made examples out of people who did not pay him back. I ran a hand down my face. "How much does he owe?" "More than he can pay," Daniel said grimly. "And Vincent is already looking for him." I exhaled slowly. "So what happens now?" "Now?" Daniel said. "Now Josh has a much bigger problem than you." A week later, the fallout hit full force. Josh had sold his car, his furniture, even some of our grandfather's old belongings, desperate to scrape together money. But it was not enough. Vincent's people found him. And while I do not know the exact details of what happened, I do know one thing: Josh was gone. Left town overnight. No forwarding address. No goodbye. Just disappeared. And just like that, the golden boy who had always talked his way out of trouble had finally met a problem he could not escape. I should have felt bad. A part of me did. Despite everything, Josh was still my brother. We had grown up together, shared the same childhood memories. There were moments, before the lies, before the betrayal, when I would have done anything to protect him. But Josh had made his choices. And now, he had to live with them. One evening, as I sat on the porch of my new home, watching the sun set over the lake, I felt something I had not felt in years. Peace. The house was mine, not just legally, but emotionally. The ghost of Josh's greed no longer lingered here. The space felt warm again, filled with memories of Grandpa, not the bitterness of betrayal. I had spent so long cleaning up Josh's messes, being the forgiving one, the responsible one. Not anymore. I had fought back. I had stood my ground, and I had won. The house was mine. But more than that, the future was mine. And as the last bit of sunlight faded, I smiled to myself. Because for the first time in my life, I knew Josh was never coming back.